$1 billion. That's how much money Assassin's Creed Valhalla has raked in for Ubisoft since its launch in late 2020. So while many OG AC fans are unsatisfied with the direction this franchise has taken in recent years, it's clear that the RPG model is here to stay. In this video, I'll be reviewing Assassin's Creed Valhalla and telling you whether it's worth your time today. We'll dive deep into the combat, stealth mechanics, quest structure, exploration, story, and the major DLC. There will be some spoilers during the story section, but don't worry, I'll warn you before diving into all that. So buckle up, grab some iced coffee, and let's go a Viking in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. What's up, everyone? Big Dan here. I make videos about RPGs and action games. So if you enjoy this video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Big Dan Gaming. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Assassin's Creed Valhalla has become one of those games that I revisit annually. It's a guilty pleasure of sorts. The combat and core gameplay loop is incredibly fun, even if the overall experience can be a bit shallow and repetitive at times. I'm a sucker for open-world action games and RPGs, and Valhalla scratches that itch when I want to take a break from other titles like Cyberpunk, Mass Effect, or The Witcher 3. Last year I said Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a game for the unemployed, because while it is a very fun game, it is also a massive time investment. There is so much content in this game, almost too much content to complete if you have a busy life. When you include all the free and paid DLC, main story, and side content, you could easily spend over 200 hours in Valhalla during a single playthrough. And while Valhalla's massive runtime isn't inherently bad, it's just that not all the content in this game meets the same level of quality. The main story feels disjointed with lots of alliance building that seems disconnected from the core story about Sigurd and the Order of the Ancients. Completing the main story alone consumes over 50 hours of your time, and that's if you're really barreling through it. It's more like 70 hours if you dabble in any exploration or side content at all, which you'll most likely want to do because this is an open world RPG after all. But how RPG is Assassin's Creed Valhalla? Well, there are certainly a lot of choices and consequences you can make in the main story, and some of them can significantly impact the plot, including the game's ending. For this playthrough, I decided to make the worst possible choices to see how things would shake out.
Hey, Big Dan, don't you always make bad decisions in RPGs?
Hey, we don't need to dwell on the past now. Sure, I make bad choices from time to time, but I do it for you guys. Now don't get it twisted. AC Valhalla does not compare to The Witcher 3, Fallout New Vegas, or Mass Effect when it comes to making big story choices. While a handful of choices will make a significant difference, many of them will just lead you to some minor branching paths that inevitably dovetail back into the standard plot with no long-term consequences. Spoiler warning here. For instance, there's a quest where you have to identify a traitor that has infiltrated one of your allies. After interrogating them both, you'll decide who the traitor is. If you pick the wrong person, you'll have an additional section of combat during the main quest, and the woman you are escorting on that mission will take an arrow in the knee.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
But after that short section is completed, the rest of the story proceeds exactly as it would have if you made the correct choice. So overall, Valhalla is not the most impressive game from the standpoint of impactful story choices, but there are still enough decisions that I've had fun exploring alternate outcomes on repeat playthroughs. As for other aspects of role-playing, at the beginning of the game, you'll customize your version of Eivor, which basically just comes down to selecting either a male or female character. There is also a third option to let the Animus decide, which I believe just defaults to the female option. I always tell myself that I'm going to pick female Eivor one of these days, but the male version is just such a giga-chad that I never end up doing this.
You Saxons and your tiny splendor. You've never seen mountains, have you? Or deep fjords, like a giant's axe wound. Or towering falls that steam in the dead of winter. Snow sparkling like a blanket of jewels. That is splendor.
The voice acting for bro Eivor is just so good, while female Eivor sounds like she chain smokes a pack a day.
That cannot be right. I would never betray Sigurd. He's my brother.
Eivor's personality is largely set in stone. You can choose some dialogue options to make them more aggressive or more diplomatic, but aside from that, there isn't a whole lot of role-playing with this character. While there is some wiggle room with your story choices, Eivor is a fairly well-defined protagonist, so he's more akin to Geralt of Rivia than, say, Commander Shepard or one of them blank slate characters from Fallout or Elder Scrolls. I'll double back on the story a bit later in this video, but for now, let's dive into the combat and character builds.
That fate we met today. Why does a Dane fight tooth and nail for a Saxon?
The combat in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is incredibly fun, if not all that deep or difficult. The main appeal of this game for me is living that Viking lifestyle, and the combat plays a major role in bringing that to life. The melee combat is pretty basic. You've got light and heavy attacks, parrying, blocking, and some flashy finisher animations. There is a decent amount of weapon variety, such as axes, swords, flails, spears, hammers, and more. My favorite is the blacksmith's hammer, which I typically use for the majority of my playthroughs until I can get Thor's mythical hammer in the late game. And then there's bows, but those are for soy boys. Real Vikings dive into the heat of the action head first with berserker strength and blood rage. Eivor also has a variety of combat abilities that can be triggered at the cost of adrenaline. Abilities are unlocked and upgraded by finding ability books via exploration. I really enjoy Dive of the Valkyries and Throwing Axe Fury, so I lean pretty heavily into those abilities every time I play this game. There are also some cool ranged abilities like summoning a wolf to attack your foes. Character building and progression in this game is kind of strange. The skill tree is an absolute shit show. Valhalla has completely replaced a traditional leveling system with this monstrosity. Now, instead of gradually gaining levels, you'll constantly be earning skill points to invest for tiny incremental gains to damage, HP, and more. Occasionally, you'll unlock bigger perks such as new adrenaline bars, auto-looting, and even the ability to dual-wield heavy weapons. The tutorial messages assure you that you can respec your skill points at any time. And while this is technically true, who wants to manually respec 200 skill points? The 3 different skill tree branches, Bear, Raven, and Wolf, also seem kind of meaningless too. I guess they broadly cover melee, stealth, and range skills respectively, but you'll inevitably be investing points in all 3 branches, so it's not like you're crafting a specific build with this skill tree. Power levels were an interesting concept, but the execution is pretty scuffed if you ask me. Now on the other hand, I do enjoy what Valhalla has done with gear progression. Assassin's Creed Odyssey had a looter-shooter style system where you constantly got identical versions of the same gear with different stats. So you'd frequently be switching out pieces of gear or upgrading older pieces to max out your DPS and defense. It was a lot of tedious fiddling around in menus and visiting blacksmiths every time you leveled up. In Valhalla, you only get a handful of weapons and armor pieces which you will upgrade and ascend throughout the game. You do this by collecting ingots and other upgrade mats out in the game world. So that starter set of gear you get in the beginning of the game can be viable throughout your whole playthrough if you continuously upgrade it. Overall, I like this system better than Assassin's Creed Odyssey because it allows me to spend more time questing and exploring instead of constantly fine-tuning my gear. Another big part of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is raiding and building your settlement of Ravensthorpe.
Wait a minute. I thought this game was about assassins.
Hey, don't worry about that. Valhalla is about raiding monasteries with the boys. I guess they don't call them hidden ones for nothing, cause them mofos is barely in this game. The assassin stuff is way, way, way in the background. As an experiment, I wanted to see how far I could progress through the main story without ever building the Assassin's Bureau in my settlement. Turns out you can easily go over 30 hours without ever doing this. The most hilarious part about this is that you need to build the Hidden Ones Bureau in order to learn the Leap of Faith from Hytham. So instead of gracefully diving into haystacks like a typical assassin, my guy was doing straight up cannonballs into them piles for over 30 hours. Aside from a handful of assassination quests in the main story, for the most part, assassinating peeps is just optional side content. You can track targets in the Order of the Ancients menu screen, but you can pretty much just ignore this stuff and focus on being a Viking if you so choose. As for the stealth mechanics, they're pretty much the same as Odyssey and Origins. You've got one-hit assassinations on most enemies, crouching in tall grass, parkouring on rooftops, etc. You know, typical Assassin's Creed stuff. But at the end of the day, this is more of a Viking game than an assassin game. Raiding monasteries is essential to gather raw materials and supplies you'll need to upgrade and construct new buildings in your settlement. Plus, raiding is one of the most fun parts of the game for me. Settlement building isn't super important, aside from a handful of merchant buildings, the Hidden Ones Bureau and Volka's Hut, which open up new quest opportunities. I mean, don't get me wrong, you don't want to neglect your settlement completely, but you can complete a huge chunk of the main story without focusing on this aspect of the game if you don't want to. Exploration is another big part of the Valhalla experience. And by exploration, I generally mean chasing tiny little dots on the map to discover valuable loot, find new side activities, and pick up relatively meaningless collectibles. The game world is breathtakingly beautiful and fun to explore at times, but I inevitably find myself just looking up locations for the most important loot and side content online, because so many of these vague dots on the map end up being total duds. Aside from collecting ingots, ability books, and new gear, world events are probably the thing I seek out most in Valhalla. Instead of including a bunch of side quests in this game like AC Origins and Odyssey, Valhalla opted for world events, which are essentially quick mini-quests that do not have any journal entry. I quite like these a lot, like the father who smelled like shit, the spin to win fake priest, and the guys fighting over a grain silo. Still, as fun as these were, I think I would have preferred actual side quests instead of world events. So, I guess it's a good thing that the main quest is essentially just a series of loosely connected side quests. The main quest in Valhalla is a bit strange and disjointed. I'll be diving into some light spoilers in this section, so skip to this timestamp if you want to avoid all that. The basic plot of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is this. Eivor and his brother Sigurd leave Norway with a few close members of their clan in order to conquer new lands in England. They arrive and build a small settlement called Ravensthorpe with the goal of expanding their influence by forging alliances with local kings and clan leaders. So there are essentially two parallel tracks in the main story. One is the relationship between Sigurd and Eivor, and the second one is building those alliances. To me, the plot between Eivor and Sigurd is much more interesting than settling the petty disputes of regional leaders. Sigurd has become obsessed with the idea that he is a descendant of gods, and goes on a mad quest to discover his heritage. This eventually leads to his capture by a priest named Fulke, who belongs to the Order of the Ancients. Meanwhile, Eivor has been plagued by visions that prophesy he will betray his brother. So a lot of the game's big story choices revolve around this plot thread. Eivor's loyalty will be tested time and again as he tries to steer the fate of his clan while Sigurd is gone. You can choose to maintain your loyalty to Sigurd, or you can console yourself by fucking Sigurd's wife on the war room table in front of everyone. Grief manifests itself in strange ways. The bizarre thing about this plotline is that it will periodically get tossed on the back burner for a long time while you spend time building alliances by completing other regional story arcs. So you could easily spend dozens of hours not moving the needle on Sigurd's plotline at all. As for the regional story arcs, they're a bit of a mixed bag. Most of the major characters end up blurring together because just when you're starting to get to know them, their main quest line ends and you're on to the next group of NPCs in another region. There are a few memorable standouts like Ivar Ragnarsson, and of course, my main man Halfdan. Hey, Half Dan, I'm Big Dan. And then there are the dream sequences. If you've played a lot of Ubisoft games, then you know they love to have your character trip balls and travel into some drug-induced fever dream. This gives them creative license to do whatever they want in these gameplay sequences. Eivor's clanmates will be like, hey, when are you gonna go rescue Sigurd? And Eivor's like, yeah, hang on a second. I'm gonna go get f***ed up for a few hours in the witch's hut over there and sort some things out in my head. Asgard is a visually impressive zone that explores Norse mythology, much like the outstanding AC Odyssey DLC. A lot of players didn't really like the Asgard parts of the game, but I quite enjoyed them, particularly some of the boss fights. Overall, the story of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is kind of a mess, but I still enjoy the game even if the plot is a bit all over the place. Alright, let's talk about the DLC. Assassin's Creed Valhalla has 3 major paid story expansions, as well as some smaller free content updates. Wrath of Druids is the first major expansion, which sees Eivor traveling to Ireland to do some more alliance building. There is a fairly shallow settlement building mechanic which is tacked onto this update. You basically raid to gather resources, to build and upgrade trading outposts, which net you even more resources which you can redeem for gear. It's basically the same gameplay loop as building your primary settlement in Ravensthorpe, with the added bonus of acquiring more gear. Only problem is, the gear isn't all that impressive compared to the stuff you can get in the base game. The plotline was pretty forgettable too. Basically, the leader of Ireland is dealing with conflict between the Christians and the pagans. His Christian advisors want him to stomp out all the pagans, but this druid chick he simps for urges a more restrained approach that preserves and protects peaceful druids. And yeah, that's basically it. I give Wrath of Druids a 6 out of 10. Siege of Paris is the best expansion to AC Valhalla in my opinion. Eivor travels to Paris to help the Franks tip the balance in their ongoing war. France is a much more visually appealing place to explore than Ireland, and the main plot offers more significant choices and consequences than the first DLC. My only gripe with Siege of Paris is the annoying rat pack mechanic. Basically, there are groups of unkillable rats that Eivor has to scare away into drains and other openings, lest you be eaten alive. They seem a bit buggy though, and it can be kind of wonky trying to steer them to the desired location. But the story and overall map in this DLC are more engaging, so I give Siege of Paris a 7.5 out of 10. The final expansion is the disappointing Dawn of Ragnarok DLC, which costs a whopping $40 at full price. This DLC sees Eivor once again tripping balls to play as Odin during an extended dream sequence. I feel like this expansion had so much potential to lean more heavily into the magical and mythical elements in Norse mythology. And while there are some cool mechanics with the Hugr Rip, a device which allows Odin to tap into a handful of magical abilities, for the most part, this DLC just involves the same gameplay loop of collecting and killing. Plus, the story ends up being a pretty big nothing burger. Dawn of Ragnarok is still relatively fun, but for the $40 price tag, I was just hoping for a bit more than a mid-expansion. So this one gets a 6.5 out of 10 for me. On top of the paid expansions, AC Valhalla also has a number of smaller free updates that they've added to the game over the past 2 years. So far, the only one I've finished were the crossover stories, which has Eivor meeting Cassandra, protagonist from AC Odyssey. This mission was pretty fun, albeit a bit short and without much substance to the plotline. But I will say, I'm very impressed with the post-launch content that Ubisoft committed to this game. Most single-player RPGs have a much shorter and less robust cycle of post-launch support. You might get an expansion or two before the studio moves on to other projects, which can leave the franchise languishing for a long time. There are plenty of examples of this. I hope other RPG developers will take a note from what Ubisoft has done with Valhalla. I would happily pay for additional expansions in some of my other favorite single-player games to help tide me over until they can fully develop the sequel. So at the end of the day, is Assassin's Creed Valhalla worth playing? Yes, if you have the time for it. Valhalla is a time sink, but the core gameplay is very fun. If you like open-world RPGs and want to live that Viking lifestyle, then Valhalla is the game for you. If you want a more traditional Assassin's Creed experience, focused on being an actual assassin though, then Valhalla will most likely disappoint you. I, for one, like the direction that modern AC games have gone in because, well, open world RPGs are my favorite type of games. So there you have it, my review of Assassin's Creed Valhalla in 2023. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more RPG videos and reviews. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Also, big shout out to Wolfhard FPS for helping me set up a few jokes in this video. I've put links to his channel in the description, so go give him some support as well. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.
Suffer!
There, you see? Didn't I promise you a rousing hunt? Brilliant! Simply brilliant!